68 years old. That was the only number that mattered to the administration at St. Jude's Hospital. To them, Matilda O'Connell was just a liability, a slow, shuffling relic with shaking hands who was better suited for mopping vomit than touching a patient. They didn't know that those hands hadn't started shaking from age. They shook because of what they had held together in a bunker in 2004 while the world above burned. They saw a janitor. They didn't know they were looking at the only woman hell couldn't kill. And they certainly didn't know that in 10 minutes, the most powerful general in the United States military was about to bleed out on their floor. And she was the only one who could save him. The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Trauma Center hummed with that specific, headache-inducing frequency that only the overworked and the underpaid seemed to notice. For Matilda Mattie O'Connell, the sound was a comfort. It was steady. It was predictable. Unlike the silence of the desert or the sudden, thundering crack of a mortar shell, the hum just existed. "Matilda! Move it, for God's sake! You're blocking the crash cart lane!" The voice snapped like a whip. It belonged to Dr. Brock Smith, the newly appointed 30-something chief of emergency medicine. He had the jawline of a movie star, the ego of a dictator, and the surgical experience of someone who had practiced mostly on high-fidelity mannequins. Mattie didn't flinch. She simply stepped aside, clutching her mop bucket with knuckles that were swollen and white. "Sorry, doctor," she murmured, her voice rasping slightly. A souvenir from inhaling smoke during a siege 20 years ago. "Don't just be sorry. Be invisible," Smith muttered as he brushed past her, his white coat pristine, his stethoscope draped around his neck like a badge of royalty. He turned to the group of residents trailing him like ducklings. "Take note, everyone. Efficiency is the enemy of sentimentality. We don't keep staff around because they're sweet old ladies. We keep them if they can keep up. If HR had listened to me, Mrs. O'Connell would be knitting in a home, not creating slip hazards in a Level 1 trauma center." The residents snickered. One of them, a young girl named Claire, looked down at her shoes, ashamed to be part of the mockery, but too terrified of Smith to speak up. Mattie lowered her eyes. It was better this way. Let them think she was slow. Let them think the tremors in her left hand were Parkinson's, or just the frailty of age. If they knew the truth, they would ask questions, and Mattie was done answering questions. She had buried her answers in the sands of Fallujah, alongside the men she couldn't save. She resumed mopping the scuff marks on the linoleum. Her official title was Patient Care Assistant, a glorified term for someone who cleaned up bodily fluids and changed sheets. It was a steep fall for a woman who had once triaged 100 Marines in a single night, with nothing but a flashlight and a pocket knife. But here, she was safe. Here, nobody died because she was too slow, or so she told herself. Code Blue, Room 3. Code Blue, Room 3. The intercom blared. The team scrambled. Mattie watched them run. She saw Smith leading the charge, shouting orders that were technically correct, but delivered with a chaotic panic that made the nurses fumble. Mattie shuffled toward the supply closet to get fresh linens, but as she passed Room 3, she glanced through the glass. A construction worker had fallen 2 stories. Tension, pneumothorax. His chest was uneven. Smith was trying to insert a chest tube. He was hesitating. "The angle is wrong," Mattie whispered to no one. "You're going to hit the intercostal artery." "Suction! I can't see anything!" Smith yelled inside the room, sweat beading on his forehead. "Damn it, where is the jagged edge? Scalpel!" Mattie's hand twitched. Her shaking hand steadied instantly as her brain shifted gears. It was a muscle memory, honed in the blood-soaked tents of the forward operating base. Phobie. Phantom. She took a step toward the door. "Hey! Matty!" The head nurse, a stern woman named Joyce, grabbed her arm. "Where do you think you're going? The linens are that way." Matty blinked, snapping back to the present. The construction worker, the clean hospital, the safe life. I thought they might need towels," Matty lied, her voice dropping back to the frail, grandmotherly tone she used as a shield. "They need a doctor, not a maid," Joyce said, spinning her around. "Go empty the bins in the waiting room. A VIP transport is coming in within the hour, and I want this place spotless." Matty nodded and walked away. Behind her, the monitor in room 3 flatlined for 10 seconds before Smith finally managed to seat the tube. The construction worker would live, but he'd have a nasty scar and twice the blood loss he should have had. "Amateurs," Matty breathed, pushing the heavy door to the waiting room open. The waiting room was its own circle of hell, filled with coughing children and angry relatives. Matty moved methodically, emptying trash cans. She was invisible here too. Just an old woman in blue scrubs that were 2 sizes too big. She reached for a discarded coffee cup on a side table when the ground shook. It wasn't an earthquake. Matty knew the difference. This was the rhythmic, chest-thumping vibration of rotors. Heavy rotors. Not the standard medevac chopper. This was a Black Hawk. Maybe 2. The automatic doors at the front of the ER blew open, not from a sensor, but from the rush of men in dark suits storming the building. "Clear the area. Everybody back. Now!" The Secret Service? Or private military contractors? Matty squinted. They wore earpieces and moved with the aggression of men who expected resistance. Then came the gurney. It wasn't being pushed by paramedics. It was being flanked by 4 Marines in full-dress uniform, their faces stony masks of grief and discipline. On the gurney lay a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite, though the granite was currently cracked and leaking crimson. His silver hair was matted with blood. His chest rose and fell in ragged, wet gasps. Matty froze. The trash bag in her hand slipped. She knew that face. It was older, lined with the weight of 20 more years of command. But she knew it. General Silas Maddox, the Ironhide of the Marine Corps. And if Silas was here, in this condition, looking like he'd been dragged through a grinder, it meant the past wasn't just haunting Matty anymore. It had just kicked down the front door. "Trauma 1! Now! Move, move, move!" Smith was running to meet the gurney, looking flustered by the sudden invasion of military personnel. "Who is this? We didn't get a call sheet. What are the vitals?" A tall man in a black suit stiff-armed Smith, stopping him dead in his tracks. "Classified, Doctor. You touch him only when I say you touch him." "Excuse me." Smith bristled, his ego flaring up. "I am the Chief of Surgery and Emergency Medicine. This is my hospital. If that man is dying, I need to know why." "He's dying because an IED fragment from 20 years ago finally decided to move toward his aorta," the suit said coldly. "And he was involved in a motorcade collision on the way to the summit. Blunt force trauma to the chest. Complex vascular compromise." Smith paled. "Aorta? We need a cardiothoracic specialist. I'll page Dr. Evans." "Evans is an hour away," the suit barked. "You stabilize him. Now." They wheeled Silas Maddox into Trauma 1. The doors slammed shut, but the chaos didn't stop. The hospital went into lockdown. Armed guards posted themselves at every exit. Matty stood by the vending machine, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Silas. She remembered him in the dust. 2004. Fallujah. He was just a colonel then. He had held the perimeter while she worked on 3 of his men in a bombed-out mosque. He had looked her in the eye, his face smeared with soot, and said, "You keep them breathing, nurse. I'll keep the devils away." He hadn't asked for her name then. The tags on her uniform had been ripped off in the chaos. He just called her Doc or Ma'am. She hadn't seen him since the extraction. "Hey, you, the old lady," Mattie snapped her head up. One of the military guards was pointing at her. "We need water. The general's aide is in shock. Get a case of water. Now." Mattie nodded, seizing the opportunity. "Yes, sir. Right away." She hurried to the supply room, her mind racing. An IED fragment migrating to the aorta, combined with blunt force trauma. That was a ticking time bomb. If they tried to open him up without knowing exactly where that shrapnel was, they would kill him. The fragment would act like a bullet the moment the pressure changed. She grabbed the water bottles, her hands trembling violently now. Not from age, from adrenaline. The battle rattle. It was back. She walked toward the trauma bay. The guards let her pass with the water because she looked harmless. A grandmother delivering hydration. Who would suspect she was analyzing the rhythm of the EKG beeping through the walls? Inside Trauma 1, it was a slaughterhouse of confusion. Smith was shouting at a nurse. "Get me a central line. Why is his pressure dropping? Fluids, wide open." "Doctor, his sights are 82%. I know that. Get the ultrasound. Look for the fragment." Mattie slipped into the room, staying in the shadows near the waste disposal. She set the water down on a counter, her eyes locking onto the monitor. Tachycardia, hypertension, distended neck veins. She looked at the general's chest. It was bruising rapidly, a deep, dark purple spreading across the sternum. "It's tamponade," Mattie whispered. The blood was filling the sac around his heart, squeezing it to death. Smith saw the fluid on the ultrasound. "Pericardial effusion. We need to drain it. Pericardiocentesis. Get the kit." He was right, in theory. But Mattie saw something else. A slight bulge near the clavicle. The shrapnel. If Smith stuck a needle in for a standard drainage, he risked hitting the migrated fragment. If that metal moved, it would slice the aorta wide open. Maddox would be dead in 30 seconds. "Needle is ready." The nurse handed Smith a massive syringe. Smith positioned it over the general's chest, aiming for the standard entry point below the sternum. Mattie's body moved before her mind gave permission. She dropped the mop she wasn't even holding. She lunged. "Stop!" Her voice wasn't the rasp of an old woman anymore. It was the command of a field surgeon. It boomed off the tiled walls. Smith jumped, the needle hovering inches from Silas's skin. He spun around, eyes wide with fury. "What the hell? Get her out of here! Security!" "You stick him there, you kill him," Mattie said, stepping into the light. Her blue eyes were burning. "The fragment isn't in the pericardium. It's wedged against the ascending aorta arch. Look at the bruising pattern on the clavicle. It's referred trauma. You go in subxiphoid. The pressure change will dislodge the metal. He'll bleed out before you can blink." The room went silent. The military doctor who had been traveling with the general, a man named Major Holloway, looked at Mattie, really looked at her. "Who are you?" Holloway demanded. "I'm the woman telling you that Dr. Smith is about to murder a 4-star general," Mattie said, her voice steady. "She's a janitor," Smith shrieked, his face turning red. "She cleans the toilets. Get her out. She's senile." 2 guards stepped forward, grabbing Mattie's arms roughly. "Get off me." Mattie shrugged them off with a surprising amount of torque, a move she'd learned in self-defense classes required for deployment. "Look at the monitor. Look at the pulse pressure. It's narrowing. He doesn't just have tamponade, he has a dissection starting." Smith ignored her. "I am the chief surgeon. Remove her." The guards grabbed her again, dragging her toward the door. Mattie dug her heels in, her eyes locked on the general's unconscious face. "Silas!" she screamed, using his first name. "Silas, don't you die on me! Not after Fallujah!" The general didn't move, but Major Holloway did. "Wait," Holloway said, holding up a hand. He looked at the ultrasound screen, then at the bruising Matty had pointed out. He adjusted the probe, moving it up toward the clavicle, where Smith hadn't looked. On the screen, a jagged white star appeared, the shrapnel, sitting exactly where Matty said it was, resting on the aorta like a razor blade on a balloon. Halloway's face went white. My God, she's right. Smith froze. The needle was still in his hand. What? If you had punctured, the recoil would have pushed the heart right into that metal, Halloway said, his voice trembling. He turned to look at the old woman being dragged out the door. Bring her back, Halloway ordered. You can't be serious, Smith sputtered. She's a domestic servant. I said bring her back, Halloway roared, drawing his sidearm, not to shoot, but to emphasize the chain of command. That servant just saved us from a court-martial. The guards released Matty. She straightened her scrub top, smoothed her grey hair, and walked back to the table. She didn't look at Smith. She looked at the patient. He needs a thoracotomy, Matty said calmly. We have to open the chest, clamp the aorta manually, remove the fragment, and then drain the heart. And we have about 3 minutes before his heart stops completely. Smith laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. You're going to tell us how to do a thoracotomy? You're a nurse's aide. Matty reached out and picked up a pair of trauma shears from the tray. She held them. Her hand wasn't shaking anymore. It was stone still. I'm not asking you to let me do it, Dr. Smith, Matty said softly. I'm telling you that you don't have the hands for it. I've seen you suture. You're too heavy. This needs a feather touch. I am the chief of surgery. And I, Matty said, looking at Halloway, am the one who put the original stitches in that man's chest 20 years ago, when he took that shrapnel for a private named Miller. Ask him about the angel of the sandbox when he wakes up. If he wakes up. Halloway's eyes widened. The angel? That's a myth, a ghost story Marines tell. Check his left flank, Matty said, pointing to the general's side. There's a scar shaped like a crescent moon where I had to cauterize a bleeder with a heated combat knife because we were out of sutures. Halloway ripped the sheet back. He lifted the general's arm. There, faded and white, was a jagged, crescent-shaped scar. The room went deadly silent. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. Give her the scalpel, Halloway whispered. No, Smith shouted. This is insanity. I will not allow. I said, Halloway pointed his finger at Smith, give her the scalpel, or I will have you removed from this room by force. Smith, trembling with rage and fear, dropped the scalpel onto the sterile tray. Matty stepped up to the table. She closed her eyes for a split second, inhaling the scent of antiseptic and blood. She wasn't Matty the janitor anymore. She wasn't the old lady with the bad back. She was the Surgeon of Fallujah. And she had work to do. The Trauma 1 bay became a vacuum. The sounds of the hospital outside, the phones, the crying children, the pages over the intercom, vanished. There was only the rhythmic, failing beep of Silas Maddox's heart monitor and the heavy breathing of the people circling his body. Matty didn't hold the scalpel like a pencil, the way they taught in neat, clean medical schools. She held it like a weapon, an extension of her will. No anesthesia, Matty said, her voice flat. We don't have time to tube him. And if we drop his pressure with meds now, he bottoms out. This is a crash thoracotomy, straight entry. You're barbaric, Smith hissed, though he was pressed against the back wall, pale as a sheet. I'm practical, Matty retorted. She looked at the young resident, Claire, who was trembling near the instrument tray. You. What's your name? See, Claire. Doctor. Mom. Claire, you're my first assist. Forget everything Dr. Smith told you about being delicate. I need speed. When I go in, you follow with suction. Do not let me lose visibility, understand?" Claire nodded, terrified but strangely focused by Mattie's absolute certainty. Mattie took a breath. She wasn't in a sterile American hospital anymore. The smell changed in her mind. It became the scent of burning diesel, cordite, and the coppery tang of mass casualties in a desert tent. "Cutting," Mattie announced. She didn't hesitate. She made a sweeping incision across the general's left chest, from the sternum to the mid-axillary line. It was brutal, efficient, and fast. Smith gagged in the corner. "Rib spreader," Mattie commanded, holding her hand out without looking. Claire slapped the heavy metal instrument into her palm. Mattie cranked the ribs open. The sound of bone grating was sickening, but Mattie's face was a mask of stone. "Pericardium is tense," Mattie noted. The sac around the heart was bulging, purple-black with trapped blood. "He's got maybe 10 seconds. She picked up the scalpel again and nicked the sac. Whoosh! Blood erupted from the chest cavity, splashing across Mattie's scrub front and face. She didn't even blink. The relief on the heart was instant. The monitor began to beep a stronger, albeit chaotic, rhythm. "Okay, the tamponade is relieved. Now the hard part. Suction, Claire, find me that metal." Claire went in with the suction catheter, clearing the field. "There," Mattie whispered. It was an ugly thing, a piece of rusted, jagged metal, no bigger than a fingernail, resting precariously against the arch of the aorta, pulsating with every beat of the heart. It had traveled through his body for 20 years, a silent assassin waiting for its moment. "My God," Major Halloway breathed, leaning over her shoulder. "If we had moved him wrong." "If Smith had stuck him," Mattie corrected without looking up. "I need a vascular clamp, the curved one, and fine forceps." She took the instruments. This was the moment. Her hands, the hands that shook when she held a coffee cup in the break room, were now performing microsurgery inside a man's open chest. "I have to clamp below the fragment to stop the flow, then extract," Mattie narrated, her voice low. "If I nick the aorta, he bleeds out in 4 beats." The room held its breath. Even Smith stopped breathing. Mattie moved with agonizing slowness. She slid the clamp in. Click. She took the forceps. She reached for the rust. It was stuck in fibrous tissue. She had to tease it free. 1 millimeter. 2. The heart monitor began to shriek. Vive, fib. His heart was quivering, not beating. "He's coding!" Smith yelled triumphantly. "You killed him, I told you!" "Shut up!" Mattie roared. "Claire, grab the paddles. Charge to 200, Halloway. Push it, pie." While they scrambled, Mattie didn't wait for the electricity. She dropped the forceps and put her gloved hands directly onto the general's halted heart. She began internal cardiac massage. She squeezed the muscle rhythmically, manually pumping blood through his body. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. "Come on, Silas," she gritted out, sweat dripping from her forehead into the open wound. "You didn't survive the siege of Fallujah to die on a linoleum floor in Ohio. Fight, damn you!" "Charged!" Claire yelled. "Clear!" Mattie pulled her hands out. Thump! The body jerked. Flatline. "Again! 300!" Mattie ordered. "Clear!" Thump. Silence. Then beep. A long pause. Beep, 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 beep. A sinus rhythm. Weak, but there. "He's back," Halloway exhaled, looking as if he might faint. Mattie didn't celebrate. She reached back in with the forceps. The heart stopped moving, which means the target is still. "I'm taking the fragment now." With one deft movement, she pinched the metal and pulled it free. She dropped the bloody piece of shrapnel into a metal dish with a loud clink. "Vascular repair," Mattie said, her voice suddenly sounding very tired. "Give me 4-nil proline." She spent the next 20 minutes suturing the tiny tear the metal had made in the outer wall of the aorta. It was flawless work, better than any textbook. When the last knot was tied, Mattie stepped back. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in blood up to the wrists. The adrenaline began to recede, and the familiar tremor returned, harder than before. "Close him up, Dr. Smith," Mattie said quietly, turning away from the table. "I believe that is within your skill set." She walked toward the sink, past a stunned Major Holloway. She turned on the water and began to scrub, watching the red swirl down the drain. Smith approached the table, looking at the neat row of vascular sutures inside the chest. He looked at the piece of rusty metal in the dish. His face twisted, not with relief, but with a terrifying realization of what this meant for him. "Get security down here," Smith whispered to a nurse, his voice venomous. "Now." 60 minutes later, Mattie wasn't being hailed as a hero. She was sitting in a glass-walled conference room that felt suspiciously like a holding cell. She was still in her blood-spattered scrubs. They had taken her mop bucket away, but they hadn't offered her a chair. She stood looking out the window at the parking lot, her back stiff. The door opened and 3 men walked in. Dr. Smith, looking smug and newly starched. Major Holloway, looking furious, and a man in an expensive grey suit named Mr. Croft, the hospital's head of legal counsel. Croft sat at the head of the table and laid a manila folder down. "Mrs. O'Connell, please sit." "I prefer to stand," Mattie said. "Suit yourself." Croft adjusted his glasses. "Let's review the situation. An hour ago, you, a member of the custodial staff with no active medical license in the state of Ohio, physically assaulted the chief of surgery, commandeered a trauma bay, performed a highly invasive, unauthorized surgical procedure on a high-profile government official, and exposed this hospital to liability that could run into the 9 figures. Mattie looked at him. "Is the general alive?" Croft blinked. "That is beside the point." "It is the only point," Holloway interjected, slamming his hand on the table. "Listen to me, you pencil pusher. That woman is the only reason General Maddox isn't being measured for a coffin right now. Smith was about to kill him with a needle." "That is a gross mischaracterization," Smith spluttered. "I was following standard protocol. She interrupted a sterile field. She's a maniac, a senile, violent maniac who got lucky." Croft held up a hand to silence them. He looked at Mattie with cold, dead eyes. "Mrs. O'Connell, we have run a background check. It seems you do have a medical degree and a nursing degree, both decades old. You served in the Navy, honorable discharge in 2005. Since then, nothing. You fell off the map until you applied for a janitorial job here 4 years ago." He leaned forward. "Why is a qualified trauma surgeon scrubbing our floors? What are you hiding, Martha?" Mattie flinched at her full name. "It's Matilda," she said softly. "Answer the question," Croft pressed. "Were you stripped of your license? Malpractice? Drugs? Why hide?" Mattie stared past him. Why hide? How could she explain it to men like this? How could she explain the smell of the burn pits? The faces of the boys, 18, 19 years old, who she had held while they screamed for their mothers as they bled out in her arms? How could she explain the day the mortar hit the aid station, the day she lost her entire team, the day she was buried under rubble for 6 hours next to the corpse of her best friend? When she came home, she couldn't touch a patient. Every time she tried to take a pulse, she felt the ghosts. The shaking started then. She wanted to be invisible. Mopping floors was penance. It was quiet. Nobody died if you missed a spot on the floor. "I retired," Mattie said quietly. "You didn't retire today," Croft said sharply. "Today you broke the law. The hospital is pressing charges. practicing medicine without a license, felony assault on Dr. Smith, and reckless endangerment." "Are you insane?" Holloway yelled. "I'm calling the Pentagon. You are not arresting this woman." "This is a civilian hospital, Major," Croft said smoothly. "Until the general is moved, he is our patient, and this is our jurisdiction. Security is waiting outside to escort Mrs. O'Connell to the police station." Smith smiled, a thin, nasty curl of his lip. "Back to the mop bucket, Matty. Or maybe a prison cell will suit you better." Matty looked at Smith. Really looked at him. The emptiness in his eyes, the ambition that outweighed his humanity. "You know, Doctor," Matty said, her voice gaining strength. "In Fallujah, we had a name for medics like you. The ones who cared more about the stripes on their shoulder than the blood on their hands." "And what was that?" Smith challenged. "Grave fillers." Smith turned purple. "Get her out of here, now!" The security guards entered the room. They looked uncomfortable, hesitantly approaching the small, grey-haired woman covered in dried blood. "Wait!" Major Holloway stepped between the guards and Matty. He put a hand to his earpiece. He listened for a moment, his expression shifting from anger to shock. He looked at Smith, then at Croft, and finally, with immense respect, at Matty. "The general is awake," Holloway said, "and he's asking for the person who cracked his chest." The ICU was silent, a stark contrast to the chaos of the trauma bay. General Silas Maddox was propped up slightly in bed, hooked to a dozen machines. He looked pale, and 20 years older than the man on the gurney, but his eyes, steel grey and piercing, were wide open. Smith was already there, hovering by the bedside, putting on his best performance of the concerned doctor. "General Maddox, it's a miracle," Smith was saying, his voice oozing fake sincerity. "It was touch and go, a complex vascular anomaly. But my team and we managed to stabilize you. You're very lucky I was on duty." Silas Maddox didn't look at Smith. He was looking at the ceiling, his mind seemingly far away. "Your team," Silas rasped. His voice sounded like grinding stones. "Yes, General. The finest surgical team in the state. The door opened. Major Holloway entered, followed by 2 security guards flanking Matty. Matty stopped at the foot of the bed. She felt sick. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion and the crushing weight of the charges hanging over her head. She just wanted to go home to her small apartment and her cat. Smith glared at her. "What is she doing here?" "Major, I told you. Get that woman processed by the police." Smith turned back to the general. "Apologies, General. This is just an unfortunate incident with a member of the cleaning staff who had a psychotic break during your intake. We're handling it." Silas Maddox slowly turned his head. His eyes moved past Smith, past Holloway, and locked onto the small, trembling woman in the oversized blue scrubs. He studied her for a long, agonizing silence. He looked at her wrinkled face, her grey hair pulled back in a messy bun, her shaking hands clutched in front of her. Then his eyes drifted down to the dried blood on her scrub top. "A psychotic break," Silas repeated slowly. "Yes, sir," Smith said quickly. She imagined she was helping. Very sad. She's dangerous. Silas let out a short, sharp laugh that turned into a cough. He winced, clutching his bandaged chest. "Major Holloway," Silas growled. "Yes, General." "Did this man," he jerked his chin at Smith, "open my chest?" Holloway hesitated, enjoying the moment. "No, sir. He wanted to do a pericardiocentesis. He was about to stick a needle into the migrated shrapnel." Silas closed his eyes for a moment. "He would have killed me." "Yes, sir. Instantly." Silas opened his eyes and looked back at Matty. The hard lines of his face seemed to soften, just a fraction. A look of profound, almost painful recognition dawned on him. "I remember the smell," Silas whispered, looking directly at Matty. Matty's breath hitched. November 2004. Operation Phantom Fury, Silas continued, his voice gaining strength, ignoring Smith's confusion. "The Jolan district. We were pinned down in that blown-out mosque for 3 days, mortars raining down every hour. We had 40 casualties in the first night. No medevac, no resupply." He paused, his eyes watering slightly. "We had one medical officer left, a Navy lieutenant commander, a woman. We ran out of morphine on day 2. She sutured men up while they were screaming, holding them down with one hand and sewing with the other. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She just kept moving from body to body, pulling men back from the edge of hell." Smith looked nervously from the general to Matty. "General, that's a very moving war story. But I don't see what this janitor—" "Shut your mouth," Silas snapped. The command in his voice made Smith jump back 2 feet. Silas looked at Matty. "They told me you died in the mortar attack on the AID station on day 4, the one that collapsed the roof." "I was dug out," Matty whispered, her voice cracking. "But the rest of my team wasn't." "So you ran away," Silas said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a sad understanding. "I couldn't do it anymore, Silas. My hands, they wouldn't stop shaking." "They didn't shake today," Holloway interjected softly. "I watched her, General. She cracked your chest in under 60 seconds and performed a manual vascular repair that was impossible." Silas nodded slowly. He lifted his heavy hand and pointed a trembling finger at Matty. "You listen to me," Silas said to the room, his voice thundering despite his weakness. "You look at that woman. You think she's nothing. You think she's too old, too broken. You think she's someone you send to clean up your messes." He glared at Smith, then at the security guards holding her. "Get your hands off her," Silas commanded. "Now." The guards instantly let go, terrified by the tone of a 4-star general. Silas looked back at Matty, his eyes burning with 20 years of unspoken gratitude. "That woman is not a janitor. She is Lieutenant Commander Matilda O'Connell, United States Navy. And if any of you had been in the shit in 004, you'd know her real name, the name the Marines gave her." He paused, letting the weight of the words fill the room. "They didn't call her Matty. They called her the Surgeon of Fallujah. And she is the only hero in this damn building." Smith's jaw dropped. The color drained from his face as the realization hit him like a freight train. He hadn't just tried to have a janitor arrested. He had just tried to court-martial a living legend. The revelation in the ICU should have been the end of it. General Silas Maddox had spoken. The hero had been identified. But Dr. Brock Smith was a man whose ego was a fortress built on sand, and he was terrified of the tide coming in. 2 hours after the general's awakening, the hospital boardroom was locked down. The hospital administrator, a terrified man named Boardman, sat at the head of the table. Mr. Croft, the legal shark, was pacing. Smith sat with his arms crossed, his face pale but obstinate. Opposite them sat Major Holloway and Matty. She was no longer in bloodied scrubs. Someone had found her a clean set, though they were still a dull, janitorial blue. She sat with her hands folded, the tremors back now that the adrenaline had faded. "General Maddox is sedated and resting," Holloway began, his voice tight with restrained anger. But his orders were clear. Mrs. O'Connell is to be treated with the full honors due her rank and service, and the charges are to be dropped immediately. "It's not that simple, Major," Croft said, slicking back his hair. "We have liability issues. The general was delirious. He was under the influence of heavy trauma. His identification of this employee as a military legend is hardly admissible in court." "I checked her service record," Holloway snapped, sliding a tablet across the table. "It's all there. Distinguished Service Cross, Navy Cross, Purple Heart. She isn't a myth. She's real." Smith leaned forward, a sneer curling his lip. "She was a surgeon, 20 years ago. Look at her hands, Major. Look at them shaking. She has severe psychological trauma. She's unstable. If we admit that we let a mentally unstable janitor perform open-heart surgery, this hospital will be shut down by morning. The insurance premiums alone will bankrupt us." Smith turned to Boardman. "Sir, there is only one way to survive this. We stick to the narrative. The general was crashing. I was preparing to operate. This woman burst in, assaulted me, and in the confusion, recklessly endangered the patient. We got lucky he survived. We fire her, we press charges, we seal the records. It's her word against the chief of surgery." Mattie looked down at the mahogany table. She felt small again. The Surgeon of Fallujah felt like a stranger, a ghost from another life. Maybe Smith was right. Maybe she was just a broken old woman who got lucky. "I have witnesses," Holloway warned. "Who?" Smith scoffed. "My residents? They're terrified of me. They know that if they speak up, their careers are over. I write their recommendations. I control their futures. They saw what I told them to see." The door to the boardroom creaked open. Every head turned. Standing there, clutching a tablet to her chest, was Claire, the young resident who had assisted Mattie. Behind her stood 3 other nurses from the trauma team. "Dr. Smith?" Claire's voice shook, but her chin was up. "Dr. Ventura," Smith said, his voice dropping an octave, a clear threat. "This is a closed meeting. Get back to your rounds." "No," Claire said. She walked into the room, the nurses flanking her like a phalanx. "Excuse me." Smith stood up. "I said no," Claire repeated, louder this time. She placed her tablet on the table and tapped the screen. A video began to play. It was security footage from inside Trauma 1. The angle was high, clear, and damning. It showed Smith holding the needle, hesitating, shaking. It showed Mattie bursting in. It showed the argument. It showed Smith freezing in panic. And then it showed Mattie. The way she took command, the way she moved, the way she cracked the chest and massaged the heart while Smith cowered in the corner. "I wasn't just watching," Claire said, looking at Boardman. "I was learning. I've learned more about medicine in those 10 minutes from her than I have in 2 years under him." "This is illegal recording," Smith shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "I will have you barred from medicine. I will destroy you." "You can't destroy all of us." Joyce, the head nurse, stepped forward. "I've logged the charts. I documented the vitals. I documented the timestamp of when Mrs. O'Connell took control, and I sent a copy to the State Medical Board 10 minutes ago." Smith fell back into his chair, looking as if he'd been shot. Boardman picked up the tablet. He watched the footage in silence. He saw the rust-covered shrapnel being pulled out. He saw the perfect sutures. He looked up at Smith. "You told me she was a maniac. You told me she attacked you." "She did," Smith lied, desperate. "Psychologically." Boardman stood up. He looked at Mattie. For the first time, he didn't see a liability. He saw the only reason his hospital wasn't about to be national news for killing a war hero. "Dr. Smith," Boardman said quietly, "you're fired. You can't. You are fired for gross incompetence, falsifying medical records, and attempted manslaughter. Security will escort you out." Smith looked around the room. He looked for an ally. He found only contempt. He looked at Mattie one last time, expecting to see triumph in her eyes, but Mattie just looked tired. "Go home, Brock," she said softly, "before you kill someone who can't be saved." Smith slumped. 2 guards, the same ones he had ordered to arrest Mattie earlier, stepped forward and gripped his arms, none too gently. They marched him out of the room, his white coat looking suddenly like a costume he had no right to wear. Mr. Croft closed his legal folder. "Well," he said, clearing his throat awkwardly. "It seems we need to discuss a severance package for Mrs. O'Connell. And perhaps a reinstatement of credentials?" Mattie shook her head. She held up her hands. They were trembling violently again. "I can't operate," she said. "Not anymore. Today was a ghost. It won't happen again." "Then what do you want?" Boardman asked. "Name it." Mattie looked at Claire. She looked at the young nurses who had risked their jobs for her. "I don't want to mop floors," Mattie said, "and I don't want to cut. But I want to teach. I want to teach them what books can't. I want to teach them how to keep people alive when the world is burning down around them." Boardman nodded. "Done. Director of Trauma Education. Effective immediately, with a salary to match." Mattie nodded. She stood up. "Thank you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a patient to check on." The morning of General Silas Maddox's discharge, the atmosphere inside St. Jude's Hospital had shifted from the sterile indifference of a medical facility to the hushed anticipation of a cathedral. Outside the sliding glass doors, the world was screaming. News vans from CNN, Fox, and the BBC were parked on the curbs, their satellite dishes raised like metallic sunflowers drinking in the drama. The headlines had been running non-stop for 48 hours. The Surgeon of Fallujah discovered mopping floors, and General Maddox saved by ghost of war. The public was hungry for a glimpse of the woman who had humiliated the medical establishment to save a national hero. But inside, in the main atrium, it was quiet. Matilda O'Connell stood near the reception desk. For the first time in 4 years, she was not wearing the shapeless, faded blue scrubs of the custodial staff. She was not holding a mop handle to steady her tremors. She wore a navy blazer, crisp and tailored, over a white blouse, clothes that Claire Ventura had rushed out to buy for her the day before. Her grey hair, usually pulled back in a fraying knot to keep it out of the bleach water, was neatly styled. She looked professional. She looked commanding, but she also looked terrified. "You look like an admiral," Claire whispered, standing beside her. The young resident was beaming, clutching a clipboard to her chest like a shield. Mattie looked down at her hands. They were resting on the reception counter, vibrating with that familiar, rhythmic tremor. "I look like an old woman in a new suit, Claire, and my hands are still shaking." "Let them shake," Claire said fiercely. "They've earned the right to be tired." The elevator doors at the far end of the hall chimed. The sound echoed like a bell toll. Every conversation in the lobby stopped. Doctors stopped reviewing charts. Nurses froze mid-step. Even the new custodial crew, young men and women who had looked right through Mattie a week ago, stopped their work and stood at attention, lining the walls. The doors slid open. First came the Marines, 4 of them, dressed in full-dress blues, their brass buttons gleaming under the fluorescent lights, their white gloves stark against the dark fabric. They moved with a synchronized precision that made the hospital staff straighten their own postures instinctively. Then came Major Halloway, carrying the general's bag. And finally, General Silas Maddox. He was seated in a wheelchair, pushed by a stone-faced corporal. Silas looked pale, the skin around his eyes bruised and weary. The sheer physical toll of having his chest cracked open 72 hours ago was evident in the shallow rise and fall of his shoulders. But his eyes, those steel-grey eyes that had stared down insurgents and politicians alike, were burning with a fierce, unyielding light. As the procession moved down the long corridor toward the exit, the silence in the lobby deepened. It was a heavy, respectful silence. the kind usually reserved for funerals or coronations. When the wheelchair reached the center of the atrium, 10 feet from where Matty stood, Silas raised a hand. "Halt!" he rasped. The corporal stopped instantly. Silas gripped the armrests of the chair. His knuckles turned white. He took a breath, wincing as his ribs expanded against the fresh sutures and the healing bone. "General, sir." Holloway stepped forward, concern etched on his face. "Protocol states you stay seated until the vehicle. You risk dehiscence of the wound if you strain." "Protocol can go to hell," Silas growled. "I didn't crawl out of the Jolan district to roll out of this building like an invalid." With a groan that was audible in the quiet room, the old warrior pushed himself up. His legs shook, his breath hitched. But he stood. He stood to his full height, towering over the Marines, towering over the staff, a monolith of willpower holding a broken body together. He turned slowly until he was facing Matty. For a long moment, nobody breathed. The distance between them was only a few yards, but it spanned 20 years of history. It spanned the distance between a burning tent in a desert and a sanitized lobby in Ohio. "Commander O'Connell," Silas said. His voice was rough, like gravel tumbling in a mixer, but it carried to the back of the room. Matty stepped forward. She didn't bow her head. She didn't look away. "General Maddox." Silas looked at her, really looked at her. He didn't see the wrinkles or the age spots. He didn't see the janitor. He saw the woman who had knelt in the blood and dust, illuminated by the red flare of emergency strobes, sewing his aorta, while mortar shells dismantled the world around them. "They told me you were dead," Silas said softly, the intimacy of the moment making the crowd feel like intruders. "After the extraction, the report said the aid station took a direct hit. No survivors." "I was buried," Matty replied, her voice steady despite the tears pricking her eyes. "By the time I dug myself out, the choppers were gone. I thought it was better to stay dead. The war didn't leave much of me left to bring home, Silas." "It left the best part," Silas countered. He reached into the breast pocket of his uniform jacket. His hand, usually so steady, trembled slightly, a mirror of her own. He pulled out a heavy, gold coin. It wasn't a standard unit coin. It was larger, etched with deep relief, catching the light. "I have carried this in my pocket every day since November 2004, Silas announced, raising his voice so the hospital administrator, Mr. Boardman, could hear him from the balcony above. "I swore that if I ever found the angel of the sandbox, I would give it to her. It is the chairman's coin. But more than that, it is my marker." He took 2 painful steps forward and took Matty's right hand, the shaking hand. He didn't recoil from the tremor. He gripped it firmly, pressing the cold metal into her palm, closing her fingers over it with his own. "You saved my life twice, Matty," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "And this country treated you like garbage. I cannot apologize for the United States government, but I can apologize for myself. I am sorry it took me 20 years to find you." Matty looked at the coin. She felt the weight of it, heavy and permanent. The shame she had carried for surviving when her team hadn't, the shame that had driven her to the mop and bucket, began to dissolve. "You're alive, Silas," she whispered. "That's all the thanks I ever needed." Silas stepped back. He adjusted his jacket. He took a deep breath, fighting through the pain in his chest to achieve a perfect posture. "Detail!" Silas barked. The 4 Marines snapped to attention with a thunderous clap of boots on the tile. "Present. Arms!" The Marines raised their hands in a slow, crisp salute. Major Holloway followed, and then General Silas Maddox, the Ironhide, The man who made politicians tremble raised his hand to his brow. He locked eyes with the former janitor and held the salute. It was a gesture of supreme respect, usually reserved for the president or the fallen. Mattie's chin quivered. The tears finally spilled over, tracking through the lines on her face, but she didn't break. She straightened her spine. The muscle memory of the Navy officer took over. She raised her shaking hand. She flattened her palm. She returned the salute. For 10 seconds the world stood still. Then, from the side, Claire Ventura raised her hand to her brow. Then Joyce. Then the orderlies. Then, slowly, the entire lobby, doctors, nurses, patients, janitors, joined in. It wasn't a perfect military formation. It was a messy, beautiful wave of recognition. They were saluting the woman they had ignored for years. "Order! Arms!" Silas shouted. The hands dropped. Silas nodded to her one last time. "Carry on, Commander." "Carry on, General," Mattie replied softly. He lowered himself back into the wheelchair, his strength spent, and the detail wheeled him toward the automatic doors. The flashbulbs erupted outside, a blinding storm of white light. But Silas didn't look at the cameras. He kept his eyes forward, alive because of the woman standing behind him. The doors slid shut, cutting off the noise of the press. Mattie stood alone in the center of the atrium, clutching the coin. She took a deep, shuddering breath. It felt like the first clean breath she had taken in 2 decades. She turned around. The staff was staring at her, waiting. They weren't waiting for the janitor to clean a spill. They were waiting for orders. Claire stepped forward, her eyes wet but bright. "Dr. O'Connell, the trauma board is full. We have 3 incoming MVAs and a gunshot wound en route. Dr. Evans is asking for a consult on a complex chest tube." Mattie wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at her reflection in the glass of the reception desk. She didn't see a ghost anymore. She slipped the coin into her pocket. "Tell Evans to prep the thoracotomy tray just in case," Mattie said, her voice ringing out clear and authoritative, the rasp of the smoke gone. "And Claire, tuck your shirt in. We're professionals, not amateurs," Claire grinned, a wide, dazzling smile. "Yes, ma'am." Mattie O'Connell turned on her heel and walked toward the trauma bay, her shoes clicking rhythmically on the floor she used to scrub, ready to teach the next generation how to save the world. And that is the incredible, true-to-life drama of Matilda O'Connell, the hero the world tried to throw away. It just goes to show that true strength doesn't have an expiration date, and heroes often walk among us in the most unexpected disguises. Mattie proved that while hands may shake with age, the heart of a warrior never wavers. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets us know you want more powerful stories like this one. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family to remind them to respect every person they meet. You never know who they really are. And make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. What do you think? Should Smith have gone to jail? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.